Hi everybody, today is the 8th of August 2017 and I have partially, at least anyway, I have addressed the issue or the issues, let's say, surrounding trains. I call the train Queensland Rail train of shame. There's two of them actually, the Westlander and an Inlander, but I had one person on YouTube criticise me or say, oh, the footage you used was out of date, that was the old Westlander. Well, in answer to that, I'll deal with that myself now. You got me in the situation of talking to you in person about it rather than using footage of the Westlander, which was my own footage of a trip I did with John Boyle back in a couple of years ago now. Anyway, went out to Charleville and we went out by a sleeping car, and they had a snack bar lounge on there, and we got a bus out to Quilpie and so on. Anyway, those days are over because Queensland Rail is the only railway system in the world that provides sleeping berths for their crew but not for passengers. I challenge Queensland Rail or anybody to show me a similar system anywhere in the world. Now, I would make a number of suggestions, and I want them to be taken as genuine suggestions that are viable and cost effective, and I'd also discuss some options for those two trains, and then beyond that, if the trains are to be cut out, which I hope they're not, what could be done in the future. And I'm very much pro-rail. I'm a railway enthusiast, as many people know. First of all, I would discuss the Inlander. Now, at present, it's just a third world train. It's worse than a third world train. I travelled on it from some time ago, a little while ago. And I deliberately did so during daylight hours. In other words, what I did was get on the train at Charleville, what am I talking about, guys? Townsville, and went out to Charters Towers. And you can do that on a Wednesday and on a Saturday, actually, from Townsville. Then stayed overnight, and then there's a bus 8 o'clock in the morning that goes to Townsville Airport, and in near town it goes to a shopping centre where you can get local buses into town, or in this case I was put off at the railway station. I could make my way into town and come back and get a train. Well, I was able to sample a train in daylight hours, and you can do the same with the Westlander as far as like coming in from Toowoomba to Ipswich and Brisbane by going out the day before by bus and coming in. Now, that's not what I'm really on about here. That gives you those couple of options. That's twice a week too. But what I would suggest is to have the Inlander start out of Cairns on a Tuesday and Friday night, virtually at midnight, and have it operate to Townsville, where passengers would have an opportunity to do a tour or stretch their legs and go downtown and do whatever they wish and come back, and the train would go at its normal time of 12:40 PM and go out to Mount Isa, and it would turn around and would come back, and when it gets into Townsville in the morning, it would continue straight on to Cairns and get to Cairns late in the evening. Now, it would be possible to have a turnaround time that would be fairly tight on one of the days, but let's not worry about the turnaround time so much now. They can work that out. Queensland Rail are not stupid. They can figure out a way of doing this. But what kind of carriages would you have? Well, we've got the current stainless steel cars, but what you would have is conversion of one of the stainless steel cars to a rail bed car. Now, anyone who's been on the rail beds on the Spirit of Queensland knows that they're quite okay. They're quite acceptable. They don't offer the same privacy and security as a sleeping car. But they're a reasonable alternative to, or certainly a great alternative indeed, to sitting up. So I would, under the circumstances, like to do that. I'd also like Queensland Rail further that if they're going to try and save that train and the Westlander, well, they don't have to do this to a Westlander, by the way. The Inlander, they could look at the Amtrak roomette concept. Now, they may not be able to fit them in. They should be able to fit them in. They've currently got, by the way, converted roomette cars on the Spirit of the Outback, and they have 2 passengers per compartment, like it's twinette, but all they did was knock out the walls on twinette cabins, and they had a limited number of roomettes, like 4 roomettes, and the rest were twinette cabins. Well, they could do something like that on another car. They could put in 2-person. They could have an upper and a lower, like they do in Amtrak, where they have a toilet, by the way, and they have 2 beds, a wash basin, and they have a little wardrobe and so on. So you could have, in the Queensland context, you could have 14 2-person bedrooms. In other words, 2-person roomettes where you could have up to 28 people per car, which is far greater, far greater capacity than the rail beds, which have 16 in one and 19 in the other rail bed. I think for so they can have wheelchair access, and disabled people can get on and so on. But you could do the same kind of thing with a sleeping car. Have a proper, you could have a shower, you could have a toilet, a couple of toilets, and so forth. You could do the same kind of idea and have a sleeping car on that train. But to start off, you could have just as I said, a rail bed car. Create that, and you've got 5 dining cars that have had a counter cut into the side of the kitchen, so that it might be usually a lady or someone, a staff member, that can have the the till there and the counter, and they can serve you food and microwave it and so forth, and only requires 1 person in there to serve people. They can go to the dining, the tables, and they could sit down and enjoy a meal and go back to their seat and relax. Now, if they had the rail bed, of course they'd have those put down later on at night time, and they'd use those. And as I said, later on followed, if they're successful, as I'm sure they would be, with the adoption of a sleeping car for that service. Now, as for the Westlander, it'd be controversial, I guess, in a way, and some people might not agree with me, but I think in order to save that train, it could be converted to a daylight service, leaving Brisbane, I would suggest 3 days a week, actually, Monday, Wednesday and Friday, go out to Roma, where it would terminate, and one bus would go from Roma through to Charleville and Quilpie, and another bus would go Roma, St George, Cunnamulla. And I'd do that 3 days a week, and then return the next morning out of those destinations, connecting in the afternoon for a late evening arrival back in Brisbane. Now that saves people travelling overnight on sitting up, and as I said, Queensland Rail amazingly expect people to sit up all night, and they compensate them on the Inlander with a free cup of tea. Oh, look, you can have a free cup of tea. You can have a sandwich, a ham and cheese sandwich. There you go. There you go for the 21-hour trip. You can have that. Well, I think it's designed by Queensland Rail to get rid of both trains, and I think, incidentally, when people might say, "Oh, you're anti-ALP or you're anti-Labor," well, yes, in a way I am, but I say the Labor Party could redeem itself by fixing those 2 trains up and encouraging tours to operate out of Mount Isa to various places for people to see, or spend a few days like they do in Longreach. And they could go to see the dinosaur things, go to Richmond. They could go to places, reboard the 2nd train later on, a few days later, and come back from Richmond back to Townsville. And then they could go from Townsville back to Brisbane, for argument's sake. They could come up with something that is suitable. I know that when I'm talking about this option of the Westlander terminating at Roma, it's just not practical for it to run all the way by rail through to attempt to get to Charleville and then attempt to get out all the way out. You'd be there at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, or even later. It's just not practical. I would put those two suggestions forward, in other words, and then I would also hope that as I was discussing this idea of Amtrak style roomettes, which are not roomettes in the old sense that we are used to in Australia, and that's the American heritage roomettes that only have for one person. These are like happened previously on the Indian Pacific and the GAN. They had this thing they call Red Kangaroo Twinette. Well, they're an old design, but they could have a modern day version of those, and they can have toilets in every cabin, because my wife and I, indeed, we travelled for a 15-day Amtrak pass around America, enjoyed ourselves back in 2014, had a great time. But those roomette cars, or the cabins, are affordable and viable, and you spend most of your day in the lounge and the dining car and so on anyway. So that concept can be adopted for Queensland. I speak equally in a sense for, and I speak in a sense with caution against both the Labor Party and against the LNP. Now, I don't wish to be nasty or anything like that or jump the gun on some of this, but I would never be surprised if both the Inlander and Westlander are replaced by buses. But if it comes down to that, and that does happen, and I don't encourage it, I've just given you an outline now of what I would like to see develop. But if they're going to do that, they could connect out of Townsville every day of the week, and they could probably have 6 days a week service to Cairns instead of 5. Very viable. They should have had the 6 by now. And they could have had a 6-day or even a 7-day a week bus Townsville to Mount Isa, and leaving there to come back. It'd have to be 3 o'clock or so in the morning to get back at 3 o'clock in the afternoon in Townsville, connect to go to Brisbane. So that would be a reasonably viable system. As I said, I don't encourage it, but that's what I'm saying would probably develop. But I would expect them to provide free transportation for pensioners out to Mount Isa, either via Charleville or via Townsville. I would accept that in a sense, because then you could stay overnight in Mount Isa and go down by bus to Longreach, where you could get the Spirit of the Outback to Brisbane with a sleeping car, by the way. I've got to keep emphasising this. Why is that train so popular? Why is it 11 cars filled up quite a bit of the time during the year with tours and everything else? Well, the attractions are out there at Longreach. You know, you've got the Stockman's Hall of Fame, and you've got the Qantas Museum, and you've got tours on the river and so on. But the point is, people want and get, in other words, a sleeping berth on that train. And in fact, they can get economy class sleepers as well. And I got a laugh, by the way, in getting on that subject, that they charge $90 for a berth on economy class, whereas you can get a hotel out there for about that, well, that's en suite for a room. Just by the way. All right, well, I hope anyway that I've sort of outlined something here that I expect would be a tremendous improvement, and I've also outlined what I almost expect either the Labor government in Queensland or I expect the coming LNP government will, unfortunately for railway enthusiasts, I believe they'll whack those 2 trains out. And worse than that, and I'll say this quite openly right now, I don't care whether we're talking about Labor, whether we're talking about LNP, they would sell all those perfectly good 1980s stainless steel cars, and they'd say, well, we're doing a great job, we've got them over in Thailand or somewhere else, or Africa or wherever else. Okay guys, anyway, you know I've given my views on a pro-passenger train, but I'm hoping that people who view this will contact their Member of Parliament and speak up about these ideas and spread these ideas through Rail Back on Track and other forums to push to get the government to accept the idea of improving the trains rather than having them languish as they are now. And I never travel on those overnight trains without a sleeping car. So I'll leave you with those thoughts and hope that I hear from people. I want some good feedback on this. I want people to act on this. Get in touch with your local member of parliament. Get in touch with the mayor of Mount Isa. Get in touch with newspapers out there at Mount Isa and Townsville and places where the train goes. I have tried that in the past. Admittedly, they're not listening. But come on, guys. If you're a rail enthusiast, get out there and do something about it. And I hope that my thoughts on the matter, at least, are something that you might want to pursue. And let's get something done about it. And thanks very much for viewing.